Hey, I'm Anthony, and this is the story of how my wife Latrice publicly humiliated me at dinner, mocking my every move and laughing at my struggles like I was nothing. But what she didn't see coming was the $750K bill that changed everything. Her smile vanished and the tables turned fast. The years of my silent suffering, my dignity stripped away, came crashing down in one shocking moment. What happens next? Well, let's just say Latrice wasn't laughing anymore. It was one of those evenings that felt like a slow burn, the kind where you can feel something off but can't quite put your finger on it. The dinner table was set, shiny and pristine, almost as if it were waiting to witness some grand performance. It wasn't a special occasion, no anniversary, no birthday, just a typical Sunday night with my wife Latrice and her circle of friends and family. Yet I felt something rising in me that I hadn't felt in years, the sting of invisibility. I sat at the head of the table, as I always had, but this time, my role felt more like an afterthought. My mind drifted back to the days when I used to be the rock of this family, the provider, the protector, the one who held everything together. Now, I was just a man in his late 50s, retired from construction, a blue-collar worker who had worked his hands to the bone for years. And here I was, surrounded by well-to-do people who barely knew the weight of a hammer, much less what it meant to put in a day's honest work. Latrice, my wife of over 30 years, sat at the opposite end of the table, chatting with her friends, her laughter filling the room. I noticed the way her eyes twinkled as she shared some new story about one of her latest shopping sprees or the charity gala she'd attended. The sharp contrast between us couldn't have been clearer. While I had spent years sweating under the sun, sacrificing everything to provide for our family, she had come to see her social standing as the only thing that mattered. And she wasn't shy about reminding me of that. Her mocking laugh echoed through my mind as she made another comment about my blue-collar roots. Her words were sharp, cutting into me in ways I hadn't allowed for years. She didn't see me as the man who once held everything together. To her, I was just the man who worked the hard jobs, the one who was content to blend into the background. I stayed silent, pushing down the emotions that were rising within me. After all, I'd learned long ago not to rock the boat. I'd sacrificed everything, my youth, my energy, my dreams, all for the sake of this family. But now I wondered whether it had been worth it. Then, out of nowhere, a phone call shattered the atmosphere. Latrice answered, her smile fading as she listened. I watched her expression change from lighthearted amusement to something more serious, and I could see the lines of tension form on her face. It wasn't just the usual dinner chatter anymore. The call was from the wedding planner. There was an outstanding bill of $750,000 that needed to be settled immediately. I sat frozen, my heart sinking as I realized the gravity of the situation. Latrice hadn't been aware of the amount that had gone into paying for our daughter's wedding, all of it out of my savings. Every penny I'd worked for, every ounce of energy I'd spent had gone into making sure our daughter had the wedding she dreamed of. But now, that dream felt like a nightmare. My daughter, my only child, refused to acknowledge me in the days following the wedding. She'd erased me from her life. I had been the one to foot the bill. I had been the one who dipped into every last cent of my retirement savings, all to keep her happy, to make sure her day was perfect. But now, as Latrice heard the news of the $750K, the truth hit her like a ton of bricks. She had no idea how much I'd given up. Her demeanor shifted from arrogant confidence to shock, and for the first time in a long while, I saw her vulnerability. She had been oblivious to the toll all of this had taken on me. And I realized that what hurt the most wasn't the money. It was the fact that I was invisible to her, just like I had been for so many years. I had given my everything, and in return, I was treated like a background player in my own life. I felt the walls closing in. This wasn't just about money. It was about everything. The years of sacrifice, the love I'd poured into this family, only to be discarded like some old piece of furniture. The reality of the situation settled in. I had a choice to make. I could let this bill go unpaid, let Latrice continue to play the role of the perfect wife while I remained in the shadows, or I could confront her about the lies, the secrets, and the disrespect that had been festering between us for so long. But I knew it wasn't just about this bill. It was about everything that had led to this moment. I had been silent for too long. I had accepted the role of the invisible man in my own home. No more. The emotional toll was too much. I had been quiet, I had been patient, but there came a point when enough was enough. The time for silence had passed. It was time to speak up. It was time to reclaim my dignity. The truth was painful, but it needed to be said. As I rose from my seat, the room seemed to freeze. Latrice looked at me, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, even as my heart raced. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shouting. I was simply going to speak the truth. The truth about everything I had done for this family, everything I had sacrificed, and the hurt that had been building inside of me for years. I did everything for this family, I said, my voice steady but firm. I worked my whole life to make sure you and our daughter had everything you needed. But this is the final straw. I'm tired of being treated like I'm invisible. Latrice's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I could see the anger building in her, but it wasn't directed at me. It was directed at herself. She knew I was right. You're the one who wanted everything, status, appearances, but what about me? What about what I've given? I continued. I've given everything, and now I'm just a man who's been forgotten. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Latrice didn't respond. She just sat there staring at me. And I realized then that things would never be the same again. We could never go back to the way we were. As I walked away from the table, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was the first time in years that I had truly spoken my mind. It was the first time I had truly stood up for myself. And just like that, I realized I was no longer invisible. The question was, would they see me for who I truly am? The house felt different that night. After the dinner, after the words that had been exchanged, the weight of everything had shifted. There was no more pretending, no more of the calm, quiet nights where we avoided the inevitable truth. No, tonight, the silence felt like a thunderstorm on the horizon, just waiting to break. I sat at the kitchen table, the dim light from the overhead lamp casting long shadows on the countertops. Latrice had gone silent after the dinner confrontation, but I knew this wasn't over. She wouldn't just let it slide. That wasn't how she worked. Her pride wouldn't let her. The phone call about the wedding bill had hit her like a brick wall. I could see it in her eyes. First, it was disbelief. Then came the irritation, as if this was some inconvenience she didn't deserve to handle. I watched her put the bill down on the table, trying to brush it off with a flick of her hand, like it was just another minor inconvenience. "It's not a big deal," she said, but I could see the cracks in her facade. I knew better. I had never been the kind of man to confront someone without thinking things through. But tonight was different. The betrayal I felt was too much. The weight of it pushing me to a breaking point I hadn't thought I'd ever reach. I stared at Latrice, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The woman I had spent so many years with, the woman I had given everything for, was now acting as if she couldn't care less about the reality of our situation. How long had she been hiding this from me? How long had I been blindly giving everything I had, only to find out she was playing a game I didn't even know existed? "Anthony, it's not that big of a deal," she said again, her voice soft but dismissive. "We'll figure it out." But that wasn't the point. It wasn't just the money. It was everything that came with it. How she had turned her back on me, how she had reduced me to some stepping stone in her climb to a life of comfort and luxury. The longer I sat there, the more I realized how much I had ignored over the years, the way she had made me feel invisible, insignificant, and now she couldn't even acknowledge the sacrifices I had made for this family. I looked down at the bill again, my hands clenching into fists. $750K. It wasn't just money. It was everything. It was years of hard work, years of sacrifices, years of giving up pieces of myself just to make sure my family had what they needed. And now, it felt like none of it mattered. Latrice sat there, almost petulant, as if this whole thing was an inconvenience to her social calendar. She didn't want to deal with it. "I didn't ask for this," she muttered under her breath, as if I hadn't been the one who had given everything to make sure this wedding was perfect. I could feel the anger building in my chest, but I held it back. There were so many things I wanted to say to her, so many things I had kept locked inside for so long, but each time I opened my mouth, I hesitated. The consequences of speaking up were too great. Our marriage was already on the rocks. Was it worth throwing it all away? But then something in me snapped. Something inside me finally broke. All these years I had been silent. Silent out of love. Silent out of fear. Silent out of a sense of duty. But now, Now I realized I had been silent at the expense of my own dignity. I couldn't do it anymore. Her voice cut through the silence. Why are you acting like this? Why are you making this into a bigger deal than it is? Her words, so casual, so dismissive, hit me like a slap across the face. She still didn't get it. She still didn't understand the years of work, the years of sacrifice I had put into this family. It wasn't just about the money, it was about everything I had given, my love, my time, my soul. I took a deep breath and stood up. The room went quiet as I moved toward her, my eyes fixed on her as I finally spoke the words I had kept inside for so long. I'm tired of being your invisible man, I said, my voice steady but firm. Tired of being the one who does everything and gets nothing in return. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw something in them, something I hadn't seen in years. Was it guilt? Was it shame? Or was it just surprise? She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't let her. I paid for that wedding. I did it out of love. And now, you can't even acknowledge what I did for you. I continued, each word heavier than the last. I worked my fingers to the bone to make sure you and our daughter had what you wanted. But now, I'm just the guy who's in the way of your perfect life. I let the words sink in. The silence that followed was deafening. Latrice sat back, her arms crossed over her chest. She looked at me as if I were a stranger. There was no apology, no remorse, just defensiveness. She tried to deflect, trying to minimize the situation. You've always been so irresponsible with money, she said, her voice rising. This is your mess, Anthony. Her words cut deep, and for a moment I thought I might lose it. But I stayed calm. I stayed grounded. I had worked too hard for too long to let her paint me as the bad guy. No, I said, my voice calm but firm. This is not my mess. This is your mess. You're the one who wanted everything. The house, the status, the perfect life. You wanted all of it, and I gave it to you. But at what cost? Her expression faltered. She couldn't deny it. The truth was right there in front of her. I took a deep breath and let the words settle in. This was the moment I had been avoiding for years. The moment I finally spoke my truth, regardless of the consequences. The tension in the room was thick, and I could see Latrice's walls coming up, her defensive stance starting to show, but I wasn't backing down anymore. I'm done being invisible. I'm done living in your shadow. You can either deal with this, or you can keep pretending like I don't exist, I said, my voice low but resolute. Latrice's response was silence, complete, utter silence. I stood there for a moment looking at her, feeling the weight of the years of sacrifice and pain finally being lifted. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was clear. Silence had never felt so loud. The next morning was quiet, but the tension in the house was undeniable. The air was thick with the aftermath of last night's confrontation. I had stood up for myself, finally, and in some ways it felt like a victory, but in others it felt like a huge loss. The silence was suffocating. It was the kind of silence that made you question whether it was worth it to speak your truth when it changed everything, even if it was for the better. I woke up with a knot in my stomach, still trying to process everything that had happened. The night had gone from a simple dinner to a revelation I wasn't prepared for, and now the truth was laid out between us like an elephant in the room that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. I didn't know what Latrice was thinking. She hadn't said a word to me since our argument. I could feel her presence, her energy, but there was no warmth in it, no connection like there used to be. The silence felt more like a punishment than a cooling-off period. She didn't look at me, didn't speak to me, didn't even act like she cared about what had just gone down. I knew she was used to running the show, used to being the one who controlled the narrative. But now she was stuck, caught in the very web she'd spun herself. It was almost as if she was pretending nothing had happened. She moved around the house like she was in her own little world, putting on a front, acting like everything was fine. But I could see it in her eyes. The mask was cracking. She had nothing to say, no apology, no acknowledgement, just avoidance. And that was worse than anything. It made me feel invisible, like the man I had been for years didn't matter at all. I sat in the living room feeling that same old sense of being sidelined in my own life. She was always so focused on appearances, always so obsessed with her image. I had known that for years, but now, looking at her, I wondered how much of our entire relationship had been about her. How much had I given thinking I was building something real, only to realize I had been nothing more than a pawn in her game? The room was heavy with the weight of unspoken words. The reality of it all was settling in, and I realized that maybe this was the point of no return. Maybe I had been too quiet for too long. Maybe I had allowed her to walk all over me, to disregard my value, all because I thought it was the right thing to do. And now I could feel myself breaking. But there was also a sense of clarity. Clarity I hadn't felt before. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I thought about what she had said last night, how she brushed off the bill, how she dismissed the magnitude of everything I had sacrificed. She was pretending it wasn't a big deal. But it was. It was everything. That bill wasn't just money, it was years of hard work, of sacrificing my time, my energy, my body, just to keep things together. And now she was acting like none of it mattered. She'd always been about the image, the status, and the approval of others, but I had been the one keeping everything afloat. She was out there living the dream while I was quietly sinking. I didn't know what to do with the anger I felt. I didn't know how to carry this weight on my shoulders anymore. Part of me wanted to leave, to walk away and never look back. But then there was the fear of breaking up the family, of being seen as the one who gave up. It wasn't that simple. And yet the more I sat with it, the more I realized that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep putting my dignity aside just to keep the peace. But there was more to it. I had been holding on to the past, to the man I once was in Latrice's eyes, the man who was the rock of the family, the man who was admired. But that wasn't who I was anymore, and if I stayed quiet, I'd never be that man again. The tension in the air was thick, but it wasn't just between me and her. It was inside me. I had become so used to living for everyone else, doing everything for everyone else, that I had forgotten who I was, forgotten that I mattered, forgotten that I deserved respect. And so, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be silent anymore. I was done with the role I had played for years, the provider, the silent partner, the invisible man. It was time to stand up for myself, to speak my truth, and to demand the respect I had never received. I waited for the right moment, and then, when I could feel the silence growing unbearable, I stood up. The words came out calm, controlled, but they were the hardest words I had ever spoken. "I'm done, Latrice," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done being invisible in this marriage. I'm done being your background. You can't keep treating me like I don't matter." Latrice looked up, her eyes wide with shock. She didn't say anything at first, and for a second I thought maybe she didn't hear me. But then she opened her mouth to respond. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is," she snapped. "I didn't ask for this. You're always so dramatic." But I wasn't backing down. Not this time. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I've been quiet for too long, letting you do whatever you want. I've sacrificed everything for this family, and what have I gotten in return? A woman who treats me like I'm nothing. A family that doesn't even see me. You've been too busy living your perfect life, playing the role, while I've been standing here holding everything together." She stared at me, her face hardening. I could see the anger building in her. She was trying to push me back into the corner, but I wasn't having it. I wasn't the same man I used to be. I had nothing left to lose. Her voice was defensive. "I never asked for all of this. I didn't want this mess. You're the one who messed everything up with your decisions." I didn't let her finish. I stepped forward, my voice growing stronger. "You think this is my fault? You think this is all on me? You're the one who wanted to live this life, wanted to have it all, and I gave it to you. But now you can't even face the consequences." For a moment, she didn't say anything. The silence hung heavy in the air, thick with the weight of the truth I had just laid bare. But I wasn't finished. I looked her straight in the eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm done being your scapegoat. I'm done pretending. If you can't respect me, if you can't see what I've done for you, then maybe this marriage was a lie all along." Latrice's face twisted in anger, but she didn't argue back. She just stood there, speechless. And in that moment, I realized that I had done it. I had stood up for myself. For the first time in years, I had taken control of my life. The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of words. It was the silence of a relationship on the brink, the silence of everything that had been built on lies, now coming apart at the seams. I stood there, breathing deeply, knowing that this wasn't over. But it was a start. It was the start of me reclaiming my dignity. I wasn't sure what would happen next. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to live a lie anymore. The silence in the house the morning after our confrontation was suffocating. I woke up still reeling from the events of last night, the words hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken truth. Latrice hadn't said a word. She moved around the house like a ghost, like I wasn't even there. The house felt so still, too still. It was as though the emotional earthquake we'd experienced hadn't affected her at all. But for me, it had shaken everything. The weight of what I had done, standing up for myself, voicing the pain that had been festering inside me for years, settled on my shoulders like a 100-pound weight. But there was a new feeling too, a sense of empowerment, of reclaiming something I'd lost long ago. I'd broken the silence, but now I wasn't sure where I stood. I wasn't sure if standing up for myself was the victory I had imagined it would be. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife, and I couldn't tell if it was going to rip us apart or push us toward something new. But one thing was for sure, I wasn't going to live like this anymore. I couldn't. It had been a few days since our dinner confrontation, and every day the silence between me and Latrice grew louder. She was avoiding me, avoiding the problem, avoiding the conversation. I noticed it, and it stung. There was no apology, no recognition of what had transpired. She acted as though the previous night hadn't happened. The pain in her avoidance was worse than any argument we'd had. At least then, we were still talking. Now we were just existing in the same house, passing like strangers. I couldn't stop thinking about it. How had we ended up here? I had spent years working, sacrificing, doing everything for her, for the family, but it was all for nothing, wasn't it? She hadn't seen it. She hadn't appreciated it. And now here I was, standing at a crossroads, torn between leaving and staying. I wasn't sure which path to take. I loved my family, but I loved my dignity more. Latrice was pretending everything was fine. She'd walk around going about her day, but never once did she address what had happened. She was cold, distant. Worse than that, she was indifferent. She didn't care. She hadn't even acknowledged the $750K bill, which had been the breaking point. I couldn't believe it when I first heard about it. The way she dismissed it as if it didn't matter. It cut deep. It felt like I didn't matter, like everything I'd done was in vain. But there was more. She wasn't just dismissing the bill. She was dismissing me. And that was something I wasn't going to take anymore. I spent days thinking, processing, weighing my options, and I couldn't avoid it any longer. The emotional distance between us was too wide, the rift too deep. There was no more pretending, no more living in the shadows. I had already crossed the line by confronting her, by showing her my pain, but now I had to make a choice. Would I let it slide, or would I stand my ground and demand respect? I couldn't stay silent anymore. I couldn't continue pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. The decision was made. I couldn't live like this, not anymore. I was done. Done with the silence. Done with the pretending. It was time to face the truth head on, whether Latrice was ready for it or not. I found her in the kitchen, her back to me, fiddling with something on the counter. I took a deep breath and walked up to her. This time, I wouldn't be the one cowering in the background. I wasn't afraid anymore. "Latrice," I said, my voice calm but firm. She didn't turn around. She didn't acknowledge me at first. I repeated her name, louder this time, and she finally looked up. "What is it now, Anthony?" Her tone was flat, like she was speaking to a child. I hated that tone. "I'm done pretending like everything's fine. I've been silent for too long. You've been treating me like I don't matter, like I'm invisible. And I'm done with it." Her face hardened. "What are you talking about?" she asked, the usual defensive tone slipping into her voice. "I'm talking about the way you've been treating me for years, Latrice. The way you've used me, belittled me, ignored me. You don't see me for who I am." "You never have," she scoffed. "This again. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this, Anthony. I'm just trying to live my life." "Your life?" I took a step closer. "Your life? You've been living your life at my expense. All those years, everything I've done for this family, for you, and you never once appreciated it. You've been playing your little game, building your image, while I've been the one holding everything together. I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of being the one who keeps things running while you sit back and reap the benefits." She didn't say anything at first, but I could see it in her eyes. There was a crack in her armor. She wasn't as confident as she usually was. She tried to deflect again, but this time I wasn't backing down. "You've had your chance to speak," I continued, my voice steady. "But now it's my turn. I'm not going to stay in this marriage if it means continuing to live like this. If you can't respect me, then maybe it's time to move on. Her face twisted with anger, but I could see the fear behind it. She tried to make excuses, tried to blame me for everything, but I wasn't hearing it. I had heard her excuses for years. I had heard the justifications, the rationalizations, but none of it mattered anymore. I'm not doing this with you, she said, trying to walk away. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said, stepping in front of her. I'm done being the one who gets ignored. I'm done pretending everything's okay when it's not, and I'm done letting you walk all over me. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I was done being her scapegoat, done being the man who kept quiet. I had spoken my truth, and whether Latrice was ready for it or not, I wasn't going back. But then, something shifted in her eyes. The facade cracked. For a split second, I could see the vulnerability she had always hidden. And for a moment, I wondered if there was still something left to save. But I couldn't go back to the way things were. I had made my decision. I'm not going to beg for your respect anymore, I said quietly. Either you give it or I'll walk. She didn't respond. Her lips were pressed tightly together and her face was flushed with frustration. But she didn't argue. She didn't apologize. She just stood there, silent, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the silence. The morning after the storm felt like a strange calm. I stood in the kitchen, the early sunlight streaming in through the windows, but the house felt darker than it ever had before. The air was thick with unresolved tension. As I brewed my coffee, the silence seemed to stretch forever. It wasn't peaceful, not in the least. It was the kind of silence that makes you wonder if you've done the right thing, or if it's too late to go back. In a way, I felt lighter than I had in years. The confrontation had stripped away some of the weight I'd been carrying for too long. I had stood up for myself. But even as I thought about that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking on a tightrope. Sure, I'd taken a stand, but the consequences of that decision were just starting to sink in. The path ahead wasn't clear, and I didn't know where I'd end up. Latrice hadn't spoken to me much since that night. The house felt like it belonged to someone else. And as I sat there sipping my coffee, I couldn't help but wonder if this was it. Had I finally reached the point of no return? There had to be something more than this. The silence between us was so thick it was suffocating. I wasn't used to it. Latrice and I had always had our issues, but there was always communication. Maybe not the best kind, but communication nonetheless. Now, though, it was just nothing. And that nothing was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I started to think about what I'd said to her that night. What I had done. It was the first time in years that I had put myself first, that I had made my feelings known. But I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of dread mixed with the relief. What was going to happen now? What came after you let everything out and nothing changed? What if I had made a mistake? I needed to talk to her, needed something from her. Anything. A sign, a word. But she was avoiding me. She barely looked at me when we passed in the hall, and every time I tried to bring it up, she changed the subject or just didn't respond. It was like I was invisible again, but this time it wasn't my fault. This time, I had done everything I could, and she was still playing her games. I couldn't shake the realization that I was slowly becoming a stranger in my own home. For so long, I'd let her take the lead, let her dictate how things went, believing I could fix it if I just kept working hard enough. But now, it felt like a lifetime of giving was coming back to bite me. I stood up from the kitchen table, walked to the living room, and stopped in front of the window, staring out at the neighborhood. The sun was high in the sky, but it wasn't bright. It was the kind of light that makes you feel like you're waiting for something, but you don't know what. It felt like my whole life had been leading up to this moment, the moment where I had to choose whether to let it all fall apart or to finally stand up for myself. I knew what I had to do. Latrice had to hear me. She had to understand that this was it. No more. I wasn't going to live like this anymore. I wasn't going to keep pretending I didn't matter. I wasn't going to shrink into the background of my own life just so she could maintain her perfect image. I found her in the living room, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment, trying to find the right words. For a second, I thought maybe it wasn't worth it. Maybe I should just let it go. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I was done. Latrice, I said, my voice low but firm. She looked up at me, her eyes not quite meeting mine. She wasn't surprised, just indifferent. "What now, Anthony?" she asked, her voice flat. "I thought we were past this." "We're not past anything," I replied. "We're at a crossroads. And I need you to stop pretending like nothing's wrong. I'm not going to stay here and pretend anymore, Latrice. I need you to look me in the eyes and tell me the truth. Do you still care about this marriage, or are we just going through the motions for the sake of appearances?" She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. I wasn't about to let her deflect this time. "I'm done with the games," I said. "I'm done being ignored, done being made to feel like I'm less than. This isn't just about the money, Latrice. This is about respect. I've spent years letting you walk all over me, but I'm not doing that anymore." She looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't remorse. It was more like panic. But she didn't speak. "I've given everything to this family, to you," I went on, my voice shaking now, but steady. "But you've never once looked at me the way you should. You've never treated me like I mattered, like I was your equal. And now I'm standing up for myself. And I'm done being the one who makes all the sacrifices while you get to play the perfect wife. It's over." She opened her mouth again, but I raised my hand. I wasn't done. "You're not going to manipulate me into feeling guilty anymore. You're not going to make me believe that this is all my fault, because it's not. It's you. It's always been you." She went quiet, and I could see her struggling to find a response. I had done it. I had finally pushed through all the layers she'd built up around herself. I had gotten through. Her lips parted slightly, and for a brief moment, I saw her. Really saw her. She was scared, unsure, and trying desperately to cling to control. But there was no control left, not anymore. "I'm done," I repeated, my voice firmer now. "I can't keep living in this emotional prison. I'm either going to get the respect I deserve, or I'm out. It's your choice." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm serious. I've been serious for a long time, but I didn't have the courage to say it. Now I do." There was a long silence between us, the kind that speaks volumes without saying a word. And I realized, finally, that I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of losing her. I wasn't afraid of walking away. This was my life, and I was going to live it on my terms. "I'm leaving," I said, turning to walk out. "We'll talk about this when you're ready to stop playing games." As I reached the door, I paused, turning back to her. "I'm not waiting forever." The quiet of the house was unbearable this morning. The kitchen was bathed in the soft light of dawn, but the air felt heavy, suffocating. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder than usual, and the coffee pot hissed as it brewed, the sounds of everyday life almost mocking the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I stood there, staring out the window as I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands shaking slightly. It was the first time in days I had felt some kind of clarity. Clarity mixed with a sense of dread. The confrontation had been inevitable, but now, the consequences of what I had said, of what I had done, were settling in. Latrice and I hadn't exchanged words since that night. She'd been cold, distant, silent, and I had been waiting for something, waiting for her to either step forward or keep hiding behind her mask of indifference. But now, as I stood there in the kitchen, I realized that silence wouldn't be enough anymore. It was time to face it all, to face her, and to face the truth of what had become of our marriage. I had stood my ground the night before, but I wasn't sure it had made a difference. Latrice had retreated behind the walls she always put up when she didn't want to face something. But I had changed. For the first time, I had taken control. And even though a part of me was afraid, another part of me felt stronger than I ever had before. But I knew that this next confrontation would either tear us apart or lead to something irreversible. Then, as if she had been waiting for me to make the first move, Latrice spoke. "Anthony," she called, her voice cold and distant. "We need to talk." I took a deep breath, setting my coffee cup down on the counter. I had been expecting this. The silence had stretched long enough for her to know that things couldn't go on like this. Her voice had a tone to it, a sort of detached anger that I recognized all too well. The manipulation. The deflection. The same old tricks. I turned to face her, my mind already bracing for the emotional game she was about to play. "What's there to talk about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "You've had days to think about everything I said, and you've been silent this whole time. I'm not doing this dance with you anymore." Latrice shot me a look that said everything. She wasn't used to being confronted like this, and the anger was beginning to show. She tried to dismiss my words like she always did, but I wasn't having it. You know, she began, her tone shifting, you're blowing this whole thing out of proportion. It's not like you think. I could feel the knot in my stomach tighten as she started playing her game, the same game she had always played, the one where I was the one at fault, where I had to beg for forgiveness for things I didn't even do. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate me this time, not anymore. No, Latrice, I said firmly. I've spent years letting you deflect, letting you play those games. Not anymore. I'm done with being the one who always apologizes when it's not my fault. You've been treating me like I don't matter, like I'm invisible, and I won't stand for it any longer. Latrice's face twisted with disbelief. Oh, so now I'm the bad guy? No, I said, shaking my head. I'm just saying it for what it is. You've spent so long running away from the truth, but I'm done pretending I don't see it. You think this is all about some small argument? It's not. It's about years of neglect, of you using me when it suited you, and I've had enough. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but I stopped her. You don't get to turn this around on me, Latrice. I've given everything to this marriage. I've sacrificed. I've stood by you no matter how you treated me. But no more. I'm not going to let you make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. The silence between us grew heavy. Latrice's eyes narrowed, and I could see the struggle within her. She was used to controlling the conversation, used to making me question my worth, but I wasn't backing down. Not this time. Maybe you should just leave then, she said, her words sharp, cutting. I felt the sting of her words, but I didn't flinch. Maybe I will, I said quietly. But this time it's on my terms. I'm not afraid of walking away if it means keeping my dignity. Latrice stood there, her face flushed with anger. She was trying to deflect again, trying to make me the villain in this story, but I saw through her now. I saw the woman who had used me for her own benefit, the woman who had made me feel small for far too long. Enough with the games, I said. I'm done. You've had every chance to fix this. You've had every chance to make things right. But instead, you've chosen to hide behind your pride and your need for control. I could see the shift in her face, the realization that I wasn't going to play along anymore. Her posture sagged, and for a moment, she was silent. But that silence wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I'm leaving, Latrice, I said, my voice firm. This marriage is over, and I'm not looking back. Her eyes flashed with shock, but there was no apology, no realization that she had pushed me too far. Just the cold indifference she'd used to protect herself for so long. I stood there for a moment, letting her process what I'd said. The weight of it hung in the air, and I knew there was no going back. Goodbye, Latrice, I said, and turned to walk out. The house was still, like a tense silence before the storm. The sun had set, casting long shadows in the kitchen where I stood, brewing my coffee. There was something about the darkness that brought clarity. The morning light might have been soft, but tonight the shadows had a truth of their own, one that I was ready to face. The last few days had been quiet, too quiet, but I knew this moment was coming. The moment when I had to decide how to move forward, and this time, there would be no hesitation. It had been days since the confrontation with Latrice. The silence between us was thick, heavier than I had expected. I had said what needed to be said, but now it was my turn to prove that I meant it. No more walking on eggshells, no more pretending. I had done enough of that. Standing up for myself, as hard as it was, had given me a kind of power I hadn't known I possessed. A power that came from breaking free of the chains she had wrapped around me for so long. But now I was facing the next step, gaining control, not just over this situation, but over my life. The weight of what I had to do wasn't lost on me. It was heavy, but I had to keep moving. I couldn't let fear dictate my next move. And that's what it had always been. Fear. Fear of what would happen if I confronted Latrice. Fear of the consequences of standing up for myself. Fear of losing what I had fought so hard to keep. But the truth was, I had already lost it. I had lost myself in the process. As I poured the coffee into my mug, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because I finally knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to keep letting things happen to me. I was going to take control. I sat down at the kitchen table, the quiet around me almost deafening. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence sink in. This was the calm before the storm, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I had come this far, and now there was no turning back. I was done being passive. This was my life, and I was ready to take it back. The sound of footsteps behind me snapped me from my thoughts. I didn't need to turn around to know it was her. Latrice had finally decided it was time to break the silence. "Anthony," she said, her voice cold, "we need to talk." I didn't answer right away. I just stared into my cup, letting the heat of the coffee warm my hands. The same hands that had held our family together, but now felt more like shackles than something to be proud of. Latrice stood there for a moment, waiting for me to speak. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of rushing into the conversation. Not anymore. The silence between us had lasted long enough. I needed to set the tone. "I've got nothing left to say unless you're ready to listen," I replied, finally meeting her gaze. "No more games, no more deflecting. If we're going to talk, it's going to be the truth, and nothing less." Her eyes flickered, a mixture of disbelief and anger flashing across her face. "The truth? You think you're the only one here telling the truth? What about me, Anthony?" I felt a familiar surge of anger, but I kept it in check. No more shouting, no more arguing over things that didn't matter. I had already heard it all. The manipulation, the lies, the gaslighting. I wasn't falling for it anymore. "You've been lying to yourself for years," I said, my voice steady. "You don't get to turn this around on me. I've spent too many years pretending that I didn't see what was right in front of me, but I'm done." Latrice's expression twisted with frustration. "You're being dramatic. This isn't even about the wedding or the money. You're just—" "No," I interrupted, standing up. "This is about everything. This is about you treating me like I don't matter, like I'm invisible. This is about the years I spent being the one who held everything together, while you ignored me. I'm not going to do it anymore." She opened her mouth, probably to say something defensive, but I cut her off again. "No, you're not going to spin this. You've been making excuses for too long, and I've been playing along thinking that maybe one day you'd see me, but that day isn't coming. I'm done." Latrice took a step back, a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced with the same coldness I had seen for years. She wasn't ready to face the truth, and maybe I realized she never would be. "I'm leaving," I said, my words firm, but there was a weight behind them. Not just the words themselves, but the years of pain and sacrifice that had led me here. "And I'm not coming back." For the first time, Latrice didn't argue. She didn't fight me, she just stood there staring at me. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, the woman who had once been my partner. But she was gone now. This woman was a stranger. I turned and walked toward the door. "I'll pack my things," I said without looking back, but I'm not looking back, not ever again. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound breaking the stillness as I stood in the kitchen, preparing my coffee. The morning light seeped through the blinds, but I couldn't feel it. There was a heaviness in the air, a weight that had been building for weeks. The time had come for the final confrontation, the one I had been dreading but also knew was necessary. I had spent days reflecting on everything that had led me to this moment. The journey of self-discovery had been long and painful, but it had been worth it. The man who had walked into this battle was no longer the same as the man who had first faced Latrice's manipulation. I had grown. I had found my voice, my power, and I wasn't going to let it slip away now. This was it. This moment would either mark a new beginning for me or leave me stuck in the same toxic pattern. And so, here I stood, preparing myself for what was to come. I knew the stakes. If I backed down now, I risked losing everything I had fought for. But if I stood my ground, I could finally reclaim my life. The choice was mine, and mine alone. As I took a sip of the hot coffee, the warmth spread through me, but it did little to ease the knot in my stomach. It was a reminder of the calm before the storm. Everything was about to change, and there would be no turning back. Latrice hadn't spoken much in the days since the last confrontation. She'd been distant, retreating into herself, avoiding any real conversation, but I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep waiting for her to change or for things to magically get better. I had to take control of my own life, regardless of how she felt about it. The silence was broken as I heard the footsteps behind me. She had finally decided to confront me, to force this final showdown. I wasn't surprised. This was her pattern: delay, avoid, deflect, but when cornered, come out swinging. "Anthony," she said, her voice colder than usual, "we need to talk." I didn't turn around at first. I knew this moment was coming, but still, it felt like the calm before a disaster. I had done the hard work of getting here. Now, I had to finish what I started. I set the cup down slowly, my fingers lingering on the ceramic edge as I steadied myself. I took a deep breath before speaking. "We've been talking in circles for too long. Now it's time for the truth." Her eyes narrowed as she stepped closer. "What truth? What exactly are you accusing me of this time?" "I'm not accusing you of anything," I said, turning to face her. "I'm telling you that I'm done with this. Done with the games, done with the manipulation, done with being invisible in my own life." Her expression hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about, Anthony. You think this is all my fault? I think you've spent years making it all about you. You've controlled everything, me, the kids, the house, the money, but you never once considered what I needed, what we needed." She scoffed, her arms crossing defensively. "What we needed? You think I've just been sitting here doing nothing?" "Exactly. You've been sitting. You've been hiding behind your status and your image, all the while neglecting the person who's been right beside you. Me, the person who made sure you had everything you needed while my own needs went ignored." Latrice's voice grew sharper, and for the first time in a while, I saw something like panic flash in her eyes. "This is ridiculous, Anthony. You're making it seem like I've done everything wrong. You've always had what you wanted." "No," I said firmly, stepping toward her. "What I've always had is a role in your life that was based on keeping me small, keeping me second. But not anymore. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I'm not afraid of your silence, your manipulation, or your anger." For a moment, she was quiet, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Then she did what she always did when she was cornered. She shifted the blame. "You don't understand what I've been going through," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't get how hard this has been for me." "Stop," I cut in, feeling the tension building in my chest. "Stop playing the victim. You've been playing that role for years, and I've let you. Not anymore. I've been silent for far too long. I've let you twist my emotions, make me feel guilty, make me feel less than. But I'm done. I deserve more than this." Her eyes widened in shock as I stood tall before her, unyielding, unflinching. "You want respect? Fine, you can have it. But not at the cost of my dignity. I'm walking away, Latrice. This marriage, this life, it's over." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time, she was speechless. I had taken the power back, and she couldn't handle it. I didn't wait for her to reply. I turned, grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, and walked toward the door. Every step felt like freedom. Each step was a reminder of the years I had spent in a cage I had built for myself. But now, I was breaking free. I walked out the door, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. I had finally done it. I had stood strong, faced the truth, and claimed my future. Sitting in the quiet of the park, the sun just beginning to dip below the horizon, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The past weeks, months even, had been a whirlwind of emotions, facing down the man I used to be, confronting the woman who had once been everything to me, and ultimately learning to stand my ground. But now, sitting here, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. There was peace in knowing that the fight was over, and that it had been worth it. The emotional battle had been long, draining, and full of moments I thought I'd never survive. Yet here I was, breathing freely. And while I had learned to face the world with new strength, this was the moment where everything truly felt different. I was no longer fighting for survival, I was fighting for my future. I realized that this wasn't just about forgiving others, it was about taking control of my own story. The battle with my past, the resentment, the guilt, all those shackles I had carried for so long, they were behind me now. But the road to freedom had been hard-earned. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shackled by the emotional weight of my past. The chains that had kept me small and silenced me for so long had been broken. And as I sat there looking out at the world, I realized how much I had transformed. I wasn't just free from Latrice and the life we shared. I was free from the fear of my own potential, free from the person I used to be, the man who thought he wasn't worthy, the man who apologized for existing. I was ready to step into the future, ready to embrace the unknown with open arms and a heart that had learned to forgive, first and foremost, myself. In the days that followed, I felt lighter. I began rebuilding the relationships that mattered most, especially with my children. It hadn't been easy. Years of distance and unresolved issues couldn't just be wiped away in a single conversation. But I wasn't looking for perfection. I didn't need them to understand everything right away. What mattered was that they could see the change in me. One evening, sitting down with them, I shared my journey, my struggles, my mistakes, the pain I had carried, and the lessons I had learned. It wasn't easy to be vulnerable with them, but it was necessary. I've spent a lot of years trying to make things right in a way that kept me stuck, I told them. But now I'm finally learning to make things right for me. They didn't fully grasp everything, but they didn't need to. The important part was that they saw their father, someone who had always tried to hold it together, finally being real. They listened, and in that moment I knew we were building something new, something built on understanding, respect, and love. But there was still one more step I needed to take. Forgiving myself. The hardest part of all this wasn't letting go of Latrice or the pain she had caused me. It was letting go of the guilt I'd been carrying. Guilt for not being enough, for not seeing things sooner, for letting myself become so tangled in her web of manipulation. I had spent so many years feeling like I wasn't good enough, like I wasn't worth fighting for. But I was wrong. I had been fighting for the wrong things, for the wrong person. I spent a long time sitting with that realization. Slowly, piece by piece, I allowed myself to let go of the regret. The mistakes I made didn't define me anymore. I wasn't the man who had let himself be walked on. I was someone who had stood tall, who had finally found his strength. That's when everything clicked. I was no longer a victim of my circumstances. I wasn't a passive observer of my own life. I had the power to create the future I wanted. And for the first time, I was going to live for me. With that clarity came a sense of freedom that I had never known. I had made peace with my past, and now I was ready to move forward. There was no looking back. The future was mine to shape. I made plans, simple things at first, picking up old hobbies I'd let fall by the wayside, volunteering at the community center, reconnecting with old friends. These were small steps, but they felt like giant leaps compared to where I had been. As I walked away from my past, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. I had taken the hardest steps, the ones that scared me the most, and now I was free. I wasn't looking for external validation anymore. I no longer needed approval from anyone, least of all the people who had tried to keep me small. I knew who I was now, and that was enough. I was walking into the future with my head held high, ready for whatever came next. The road wouldn't always be easy, but I knew I was stronger than ever before. I had conquered my fear. I had reclaimed my dignity. I was finally truly free.